are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Good morning. It is Locked On NFL Sunday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are back. Football is back, and we are so glad to be here with you today, joined by my very, very good friend, Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, host of the Locked On Broncos podcast every Monday through Friday, free on all platforms, and myself, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson, Nola, N-O-L-A, on Twitter, host of Locked On Saints and Locked On NFL. Cody, it is so phenomenal to be back here with you for another football Sunday.
Hey, man, a second season of Locked On NFL Sunday Live. We get to break down all the games, all football talk, no fluff, like you get on some of the other pregame shows, man. I'm just excited that they asked us back twice. Yeah, that means we're doing something right, and obviously we have a great audience that tunes in on Sunday. So, hey, I'm excited to be back, Ross.
Absolutely. Whether you're tuning in on Twitter, on our Locked On NFL Facebook page, or, of course, on the Locked On NFL YouTube page, first of all, we ask that you do take a moment to subscribe and follow all across so you can get this daily content all across the Locked On NFL channel. But also, don't forget that you can also chime in and play along as we go on throughout the show. You have questions, drop them in the chat. You've got comments, drop them in the chat. Let us know who you think is going to walk away with the biggest win, the biggest storyline for Sunday. And Cody, here we are. Football is back. It's been a longer journey than most off seasons, considering the circumstances. How excited are you that simply we are here and football is a matter of hours away?
Well, you know what? As you said, it was a long buildup, but I tell you what, it was a busy buildup between the NFL draft, free agency, OTAs, minicamp, which we had this year. We didn't have that last year. Right. So now, it didn't feel like we ever had any time off, which is fun. It's great and all, but now, like, all the games, they matter. We got preseason games, 3 of them. Each team was able to get that outside of the Steelers and the Cowboys. They had that additional one due to the Hall of Fame game. But it's just so nice to have football back, just kind of a sense of normalcy here once again. It's crazy that we had to say, like, normalcy, right? But here we are. A regular Sunday, a full slate of games. I tell you what, there's some exciting storylines, Ross, all across the NFL here. Specifically, you look in New England, you have Miami versus New England in AFC East division opener between Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa. That's a matchup right there, man, between 2 former Alabama quarterbacks. What more could you ask for?
I love it. And of course, that was such a huge story this offseason. The New England Patriots making the decision to roll with Mac Jones. They moved on from Cam Newton. Cam Newton talking about it a little bit more openly here over the course of the last week. Currently still unsigned, but seems like he has the opportunity to land somewhere. But how did you feel about that decision, that choice by the New England Patriots to move on with Mac Jones and move away from Cam Newton?
Well, it was really interesting, Ross, because the vibe, and Mike DeBate, host of Locked On Patriots, also kept us up to date. But, like, the vibe was that, okay, Cam Newton's getting reps with the first team. But Cam, in his recent interview that he did, said, I was getting first team reps, but I wasn't getting as many in comparison to Mac Jones. And so I was surprised by it, to be honest with you. I felt like them deciding to bring back Cam Newton on a 1-year, $14 million deal this offseason, I thought it kind of said, okay, hey, look, they're going to give Cam another year in this system, and he's going to be a veteran guy ahead of Mac Jones. But from the sounds of it, Mac Jones' level of preparation, his cerebral aptitude there in terms of being able to pick up the playbook and having his girlfriend help him with the playbook, him sitting in on defensive players' meetings to kind of learn how they would maybe adjust to what he's doing offensively, or even stuff that they'd see in practice, helps him get the advantage. So, look, Josh McDaniels, Bill Belichick, they have a high IQ football player. He is a rookie, though. I think he can operate the offense, but he's going to experience some bumps and bruises along the way, but he looks like he's going to be a great fit inside that system.
For sure. And I'll tell you another game that I'm very much looking forward to. And by the way, we're going to be getting to our guests here in just a moment. We've got David Harrison of Locked On Bucks. They got a big win there. He also covers Locked On Washington football teams. So we'll talk to him a little bit about if we're going to see that Ryan Fitz magic or if we're going to see that Ryan Fitz tragic. I have a special question for him as well. So we'll get to that. And then, of course, we're also going to be bringing in our good friend Sosa Kremenjas from the Locked On Rams podcast, talk about some Sunday Night Football action. And then, Adam, I see your question here. Should should you put Austin Eckler in your lineup? We'll make sure that we ask our good friend Vinny Iyer that question of Locked On Fantasy Football. He'll be with us here later on today to talk about some fantasy football advice. But before we bring in David, just one game that I want to quickly remark on. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Buffalo Bills. Somehow this is a 1 p.m. Eastern time game, Cody. This is a huge AFC matchup, potentially even an AFC conference championship preview game, or let's just say playoff game. We know the Chiefs are going to be in that mix somewhere for sure. But Josh Allen coming off of a huge year, Ben Roethlisberger returning. I've got Josh Allen as, and shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but I've got Josh Allen as a player to watch in the MVP race, just like he was last year after taking a huge step forward with the addition of Stephon Diggs. Both of these teams continue to get better, but both of them have specific question marks at certain areas as well. But hey, you got to love Pittsburgh Steelers paying off their guy TJ Watt ahead of week 1. This is going to be a very fun one to watch.
Ooh, breaking the bank. Maybe the appeal as to why this wasn't the afternoon game. There is a team in Kansas City that you were alluding to.
Yeah,
also, Cleveland, another potential AFC playoff preview there. It's hard to argue. I think either one you could have put in that afternoon slot. Flex
for sure.
But, I think this is going to be a fun matchup. Obviously, I think the expectations are very high for the Buffalo Bills. We've seen them grow under Josh Allen. Last year, Josh Allen had an under-the-radar MVP season. In my opinion, he would have been the MVP if it wasn't for a guy in Lambeau Field, wearing that number 12,
future Denver
Aaron
Bronco.
Rodgers. Yes, future Denver Bronco, by the way. Make sure you check it out, Locked On Broncos podcast. But if you want to hear about future Bronco Aaron Rodgers, you can check out Locked On Packers, hosted by Peter Bukowski. He's going to give you all you need to know about that. But, I like this matchup. Now, here's the deal, Ross. I think this is going to be a very one-sided matchup. And I think that, yes, while you look at the defensive side of the ball, they lost Bud Dupree. They got Melvin Ingram over there on a one-year deal opposite of TJ Watt. I just have questions a little bit. Still in the secondary. Obviously, the back end, Minkah Fitzpatrick's always a player you have to watch out for. But Josh Allen has evolved so much and over the last 3 years, now entering year number 4, with just his progressions and what he's able to do, how he looks safeties off, and he's got a mega arm to be able to do that. He's worked on his mechanics to a sense where he's more accurate. And, remember his first couple of years, Ross, he came in, he was selling passes and his release was a little high. So there was this inaccuracy to him, but he's had the same coaching staff and Brian Daboll, a very, very hot candidate after the 2021 NFL season for a head coaching job. If in fact the Bills offense can continue to put things up. I think the biggest question though, Ross, what will this offense look like for the Pittsburgh Steelers under Ben Roethlisberger, who's getting older? He's not getting younger.
Right.
And you look, he's healthy now, which is a good sign. But how long will that last for where he's at with his age? We've seen it. You've seen it in New Orleans with Drew Brees. Age catches up to you at some point. And so I think there's a lot of questions here for Pittsburgh on offense this year.
For sure. It's going to come down to coaching, and thankfully for the Pittsburgh Steelers, they got one of the best in Mike Tomlin. All right, now we had a bit of a, I don't want to call it a barn burner, but we definitely got a lot of action on Thursday night as we kicked off the NFL season. The Dallas Cowboys taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay Buccaneers walking away with a big W in that one, an action-packed game between a pair of two quarterbacks that were just lights out. To help us talk about that game and look ahead at a season that they're hoping to repeat, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to welcome in our good friend David Harrison at DHarrison82, host of the Locked On Bucs podcast and co-host as well over at Locked On Washington Football Team. David, good morning, buddy. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Half of my week 1 responsibilities are already done, so I can focus on the other half. The NFL scheduling gods did me a favor because I got Tampa playing on Thursday in week 1. I got Washington playing Thursday in week 2. So my first 2 weeks of the season are very well balanced. How are you guys?
We're good, my friend.
Good,
Great to see you as always. And look, I think the reality of the situation, it's going to be tough to record 2 post-game shows in one day. What if they play at the same time? How do you bounce it? You got to have 2 screens up. So, David, I appreciate your hustle, your grind there, my friend. But, hey, can we talk about that Thursday night season between the Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, defending Super Bowl champions? Look, there's a lot of takeaways, and I'm sure that Ross and I are going to ask you a bunch of questions about this. But, first off, how good does Tom Brady look? Despite the fact that he's getting older, he still looks good. He's still smart, and they are loaded at all the skill player positions. You have Chris Godwin had a big game, and he didn't have the best game, but he had a big game. Antonio Brown emerging out of nowhere, and really Mike Evans, who we know is super talented, not as involved, but I think that might be a good problem. What were your initial thoughts and takeaways from the Buccaneers 31-29 victory over the Cowboys?
Yeah, so the initial thoughts, the defense definitely doesn't look like the defense we saw in the postseason run, especially against Kansas City Chiefs. And a lot of that had to do with the Dallas Cowboys offensive approach, getting the ball out quick, not letting those pass rushers get home, just using time to their advantage. I think that was a very smart approach by Kellen Moore. And one of the reasons why Kellen Moore is one of the fastest rising coordinators in the National Football League. But we've known all offseason that the secondary was going to be the weakness on the defense if it was going to get exposed. And the Dallas Cowboys exposed it. So I'm sure Todd Bowles is teaching his guys, because they're going to see a lot more of that during the rest of the season now that the Cowboys did have some success with it. But the good news for the Buccaneers and for Buccaneers fans who kind of reverted back to their old days, Ross, that you're very familiar with, of standing on the ledge, not jumping, but getting on the ledge a little bit, is that, yeah, Tom Brady was great. He had some turnovers, but honestly, I kind of agree with some of the commentary from the game that I think there needs to be a new category of interceptions for some of these types of things, and tip drills and Hail Marys and all that stuff. Like, you shouldn't count those, against quarterbacks. But this is 8 straight games. 8 straight games going back to last season. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense has scored 30 or more points. If they continue to do that, you don't want your defense to be bad or to give up points, you know what I mean? But if you're scoring 30 points or more for over half the season, or for even half the season, you've got a very good chance of winning every week. And yeah, Tom Brady, getting older, but getting better, it looks like.
Yeah, and I think these week one defenses are never really indicative of what a full season of a defense is going to look like. The Bucs defense gave up 30 plus points to open last year's season as well, and then finished the season as a Super Bowl champs. So I don't think that you, as a huge part of why that team as well became Super Bowl champs. So I don't think that you can put too much stock into a team's defense in particular in week one. I expect a lot of high scoring here moving forward. But if there was anything over in the offensive side in terms of execution, communication, any concerns that you saw over with this Tampa Bay side, or was returning all 22 of the starters from last year's Super Bowl run just as vital and important as you expected it to be?
They returned all their starters, and they returned pretty much the flow of the game as well. So, they scored 30 points or 31 points for, again, the 8th straight game. That's great. But too many 3-and-outs. A slow start on the first drive of the game. They did score on the second drive, so that's a little bit more encouraging. But too many 3-and-outs, too many drives, especially when the Buccaneers defense was on the field so long. We all know that, it doesn't matter how great your defense is. If they spend 70% of the game on the field, they're going to get gassed, especially first week of the season. That's terrible to do to your defense, and that's exactly what happened coming out of the Dallas Cowboys' first drive of the second half as they got the ball. To start the third quarter, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense had been on the field for 70% of the game at that point. Now, what Tom Brady and the offense were able to do is control 70% of the fourth quarter clock. And I think that kind of helped them down that stretch run, because if you go back to that, the Dallas Cowboys got a field goal in their final real drive of the game to take that late lead. I think if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense doesn't control 70% of that fourth quarter clock, that could be a touchdown instead of a field goal with a more fatigued defense. And that is the difference between this team winning or losing that game. So ball control, a very serious thing. Turnovers, obviously, with Ronald Jones's fumble, Chris Godwin. So you love the effort, you know what I mean? But sometimes, and this is a lesson Chris is going to learn moving forward, you just got to go down and preserve the field position. But those things will get cleaned up. And I think the most dangerous thing for opposing defenses moving forward facing this Bucs offense is 3 different receivers led in 3 different categories. You had a separate leader for the team in receptions, a separate leader for yards, and a separate leader for touchdowns. And then Mike Evans basically did nothing. So, you know what I mean? It's an absolute pick your poison. And then Giovanni Bernard hasn't even gotten going yet as a receiving back out of that backfield. So plenty of weapons for this team. So no reason for anybody to panic. But, you obviously look for an improvement on the defensive side of the ball and the turnover game, because you don't want to be in a shootout every week if you can control it.
Well, I would say that the Bucs didn't play their A game, right? And the fact that they didn't play their A game is scary, I think, if you're other teams, especially in that division. I know Ross, covering the New Orleans Saints, is going to have to cover that matchup 2 times per year against the Saints and the Bucs. But a lot of intriguing stories, not to mention, Tampa Bay might have the best punter in the NFL. That was a beautiful coffin corner. Back. That was back.
There is some competition in the South for that. I will give you that.
For that one.
We'll see.
But it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
We got to see if the Saints punter can actually hit that coffin corner the way that, the opening drive. That was beautiful, by the way. But, outside of that too, David, one thing I want to ask you a question about. I feel like looking back at this game, going against guys like CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, and, obviously Dak Prescott, very talented quarterback. Dallas could not run the football, but they sure could pass it. Are you concerned a little bit about the secondary in Tampa Bay? Obviously, with Sean Murphy-Bunting breaking or dislocating his elbow, that looked nasty, by the way, on the replay. Are you concerned a little bit about their depth at the cornerback position?
I mean, yes and no. So we've been concerned about the depth of the cornerback position for really the last 2 seasons. And for the last 2 seasons, we've kind of looked towards some free agent options they might bring in, or some guys in the middle part of the round, not really first round picks, you know what I mean, but maybe a third or a fourth round guy that they could bring in, and they really haven't. They've doubled down and even tripled down, or whatever you want to call it, on this secondary group. And to their credit, the group has gotten better every single year so far. But we've been worried that they were always one injury away from really being in a bad position. And really in this game, you saw them get 2 injuries deep because they were already starting without strong safety Jordan Whitehead, which moved Mike Edwards, who has a little bit of nickel talent and ability to him in a pinch. But you already have him starting as your backup strong safety. So when you lose Sean Murphy-Bunting, now you've got Jamel Dean playing on the outside a lot more than he would usually play. And you've got Ross Cockrell, who did really well during training camp and preseason, but he's a backup cornerback and defensive back in the NFL for a reason. And that's not, any shade to him. It just kind of is what it is. And when you're playing a quarterback like Dak with those receivers, I mean, the good news is that this is probably the best receiving group, or one of the best receiving groups that the Buccaneers defense is going to face from a holistic standpoint. I mean, you have better singular receivers, like Tyreek Hill and all those stuff around the league. But as far as looking at the Buccaneers roster, this group of talent, I think, is the hardest challenge they're going to have. So if they can stop the injury bug, which, is largely out of everybody's control, but if they can get healthier over the next few weeks and get Sean Murphy-Bunting hopefully back, without losing him for the year, and continue to develop under Todd Bowles, then this should be a growing point that we can look at back in the season and say, look how much further they've come from, instead of look how much worse they've been.
Absolutely. David, before we get you out of here, this question it walks a little bit of a line for you between your Bucs coverage as well as your Washington football team coverage. This was the special question that I had for you. A couple days ago, the @LockedOnNetwork Twitter account tweeted out the odds for which newcomer quarterback is going to have the most passing yards in week 1. 2 quarterbacks that you have had at least at some point a vested interest in. Jameis Winston leads that list at plus 250. Ryan Fitzpatrick third on that list with plus 450. And of course, you've got Matt Stafford at plus 275. We'll be talking about him with Sosa here in just a second. But which of these guys do you feel like is the favorite for you in terms of newcomer quarterback to throw for the most passing yards in week 1?
I'm going to have to say Jameis, just because.
I mean, don't make it sound like it hurts, David. It's
it's really tight between Fitz and Jameis, and I love both those guys from a personality standpoint and just the human being standpoint. So I love seeing each of them ball out. But I think Washington's going to be in a little bit of a tighter matchup, so I think they're going to be able to run the ball a little bit, do some more things with their backfield than the Saints are going to be. And it's if the Saints somehow get a lead over the Packers, then I could see Sean Payton leaning on that running game a little bit more. But even leaning on the running backs, not necessarily the running game, could be passing yards, for a guy like Jameis Winston. And that's huge. So I'm going to go Jameis Winston. I think second would be Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then Matt Stafford third, just because I think once the Rams get a lead, they don't have a great running back group, but they have a great defense. And I think they're going to be willing to kind of take some short drives, take some stall drives in order to lean on their defense more. So I think that's going to limit what Matt Stafford does in week 1.
Love it. I'm not arguing. I think it's going to be a little bit of a shootout between the Packers and Saints, but we'll talk about that game a little bit later on. David, we appreciate you so much for coming through. You can find David every single Monday through Friday, both at Locked On Bucs and at Locked On Washington Football Team, free on all platforms wherever you get your podcast. You can follow him, of course, on Twitter at DHarrison82. David, we appreciate you coming through, buddy.
Appreciate you guys. Go Broncos.
Hey, there we go, David. There we go. I think I'm going to be a little bold here, Ross. I think regardless, I think Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay, I think they're going to go scorched earth. I think that they're going to open things up, because I think that deep down Matthew Stafford wants to prove to everybody he can still do it. And there's a lot of talk, and I think that there's a lot of split decisions about Matthew Stafford from the Detroit fan base, the Rams fan base. They say a lot of their issues were Matthew Stafford. I disagree. When I go back and I watch film, I think that his supporting cast around him has deteriorated over the years, and I think that was a huge issue. I think that he's going to explode in LA. I think there's big things in store for him.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I know somebody else that might agree with you. Our good friend from the Locked On Rams podcast with the best Twitter handle out in the streets. We're going to bring in our guy to talk about the Los Angeles Rams, Sosa Kremenjas at QV's MVP on Twitter. Sosa, thanks for joining us, buddy. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, fellas. Thanks for getting me on. Week 1, football's back officially. It feels good. We got football all day Don't at me for 12 hours. We'll put that out right now, and I'm coming in with a little bit of anger. I heard some punter talk, and I did not hear Johnny Hecker's name a few minutes ago. So I'm a little bit hesitant there. But no, it's good to see you guys, man. How you guys been?
Good to see you, buddy.
My friend. We're good. Hey, look, I think the Rams' backup punter in the preseason was pretty dang good. I can't believe you guys traded him to Green Bay. I was hoping Denver was going to try to sneak in and get him because, look, booming him at altitude the way he was in that third preseason game had me a little jealous because the Broncos special teams kind of struggles there. But Sosa, obviously great to see you, my friend. Hey, look, Sunday night opener here against the Chicago Bears here for the Los Angeles Rams. And this is a Sean McVay-led team. There's a lot of questions, I think. But he went out in this offseason. The Rams, they made some wholesale changes. Brad Holmes obviously now in Detroit. Now you look at the fact we have Matthew Stafford at quarterback. Obviously, Cooper Kupp, he's one of those guys you always have to keep an eye on. But we were talking a little bit with David, and he said something about maybe, trusting the defense a little bit. Obviously, Raheem Morris, first-year DC for the LA Rams here, obviously replacing Brandon Staley. How do you see the game plan coming in here for the Los Angeles Rams? Do you think they're going to throw it? Because I feel like against that Chicago secondary, they got a lot of guys that are questionable. I think that they might have a really good opportunity to air things out here.
Yeah, and I think I agree. When you look at how this defense is constructed for the Bears, up front, still very stout. The questions are on that back end when you look at some of those corners. Very questionable unit. Not necessarily that they're terrible players, just we don't know anything about these guys. They have not played much. They're all relatively young and unproven. And then when you look at the Rams, offensive personnel as well, ironically enough, that matches up quite well to what they want to do as well, right? We're talking about these guys like Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp. That's what the foundation of this offense is. And I think there's just a little bit of that more, intrinsic motivation here too for the Rams. When you look at, you're now on Sunday Night Football under the bright lights, you're opening up this brand new SoFi Stadium to fans for the first time. You got a new quarterback in Matthew Stafford. I think there's going to be a little bit, of something in Sean McVay today where he doesn't want to just come out and win this game. I think he's going to want to kind of make a statement and get Matthew Stafford comfortable, get the fans going nice and early in this game, establish that pass a little bit and let the running game work off of that as we move forward in this game. So I tend to think that that's kind of what they're going to do in this game. And I heard you guys talking about that question a few minutes ago. I'm sure you guys will ask me later. I'm not going to drop my tidbit there, but that might be a foreshadow for where I'm headed with that one.
I love it. We're definitely going to come back to that one. Once again, y'all, Sosa of the Locked On Rams podcast. You can check him out every Monday through Friday and follow him on Twitter at QB's MVP. Sosa, want to talk to you a little bit about this defense real quick before we get to the fun question about the passing yards there. The Rams defense might not have been a Super Bowl winning defense last year, but in my opinion, they were the best defense in football. Do you expect them to maintain that type of dominance that we saw from them last year here in 2021?
I tend to think that it's probably fair to expect some sort of regression from these guys. I just don't think it's very fair to, hold them to that standard of trying to be that number one unit again. But I understand why there's still so much hype here. We're still talking about Aaron Donald here, Jalen Ramsey, arguably the two best defenders in football, right? These guys are truly special and in their own tiers. And then there's so many other remaining players that are still very good. You look at guys like Darius Williams, who's now entering a contract season. I'm sure he's got financial reasons to put together another dominant season. So very talented unit. The Rams do bring back Leonard Floyd as well, but there are still some question marks, and the Rams were able to overcome those last season. You look at the edge rusher position, inside linebacker. They still have some of those question marks remaining this season. And of course, Brandon Staley, the former defensive coordinator, now in Los Angeles for the other team, the Chargers, the head coach there. Raheem Morris coming into town. We don't really know what the scheme's going to look like, how much, remains from last season, how much does he implement his own style? Is it going to go, from that quarters-based coverage to a little bit maybe more Tampa 2 style coverage? A lot of question marks to answer. So I still think with that, foundational unit that you have there, a lot of that talent, you can still expect a top 10 unit, but maybe not the number one unit. And of course, game planning is only half the battle. The other half the battle is calling the right plays at the right time and adjusting in game. And I think Staley just did that, at an absolutely elite level. Last year, it's probably not fair to expect the same from Morris right out of the get-go, but I do think this unit's still so talented that, we can expect at least a top 10 unit.
Well, the question I have for you, too, the running game, obviously Cam Akers going down in the preseason with an Achilles injury. What are the expectations here for Darrell Henderson coming into this season? Obviously, some question marks. Running back, when we look at this Los Angeles Rams roster, might be the one question mark on the offensive side of the ball in comparison to everywhere else.
Yeah, that is one of the question marks for this offense going into the season. Now, Cam Akers, I think, was the guy that was scheduled to have this huge workload in terms of not only running the ball, but as a receiver too. That guy was someone that the Rams really, really loved, of course. But Henderson's someone that, I feel like there's not really a question of talent or ability here. It's more of durability. Can this guy last, 17 games now, an added game to the schedule? And how many touches can this guy see per game? Is he a 12 to 15 touch player, or is this a guy that, can somehow last if you give him 15 to 18 touches per game? So I'm not really certain on what to expect here. I think Henderson should be full stop, a very solid player here for the Rams. I'm not really concerned about the ability or the talent aspect. You look back to last year, there was I believe it was week 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles, where he flashed. I mean, he was the best running back on the team. There was no question about it. He absolutely exploded that in that game and looked like a very good running back last year, to the point where it was almost hard to distinguish a difference between Akers and himself. So, I really think that they did a good job at investing in this position. This is a guy that they did trade up, a few years ago in the 3rd round to go draft 2 third-round picks. They used to go get him. So clearly a guy they value. The only question for me is not really talent or ability. It's how many touches can this guy have and how long can he last into this season?
Oh, my man.
Rookie mistake.
Boom.
Rookie mistake. Hey, it's week 1. We're all getting it right. Week 1 defenses are bad. Ross Jackson's mic muting abilities are terrible. Guys, as we roll on here with the show, we're going to be getting to Vinny Iyer of Locked On Fantasy Football here just above. If you got fantasy football questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll get those answered. So before we get you out of here, I want to ask about your thoughts for that favorite in terms of the new coming quarterback that's going to throw for the most passing yards in week 1. The list is led off by New Orleans Saints new quarterback Jameis Winston, but not far behind is Los Angeles Rams new starting quarterback Matt Stafford. What are your thoughts on those odds and who's going to take away the crown week 1?
I got to go with Stafford. I mean, there's just no way that I couldn't. I mean, you look at this Bears defense, we talked about it. I think they're going to be tough to run against. I think every yard that the Rams earn in this running game today is going to be hard earned, and I don't think it's going to be very productive. So if you can't run the ball, you better be ready to throw the ball, and that's where they're kind of weak. So, I look at some of these other matchups, and I heard David talking a few minutes ago. Green Bay secondary is very good. Like, these guys are going to be tough to throw against, even though we know Jameis is going to sling that thing. I believe Washington's playing the Los Angeles Chargers, if I'm not mistaken. A very, very talented unit. Wouldn't be shocked if that's the best defense in the NFL this year, talking about Brandon Staley a few minutes ago. So I think things are just lining up well for Stafford here. I'm going to go with the hometown guy now. It's going to be fun to see. I'm not really sure, but I definitely think he's got a good shot to at least land very close to that top.
For sure. There's a reason why those 3 quarterbacks are at the top, and Matthew Stafford's matchup definitely helps him out big time. So as we appreciate you coming through. If you want to keep up with Sosa, go ahead and throw him a follow at QB's MVP on Twitter. And of course, you can catch him every Monday through Friday over at the Locked On Rams podcast, free on all platforms, including up on YouTube as well. So we appreciate you coming through, buddy. We'll see you here soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me.
Always love having Sosa on air too.
Man.
I think a lot of storylines of that Chicago Bears, team. Obviously, Lauren Cox not able to join us here today, but looking at them, how long before you hear Justin Fields' name called, right? Andy Dalton against this LA Rams defense. I'm telling you, if I'm Andy Dalton, I'm having nightmares. I might not have slept last night if I'm Dalton, because look, I mean, we saw in the preseason, Ross, just how I don't want to say bad, but how depleted and how just off chemistry and off balance that Chicago Bears offensive line was. Not just with the first team. I mean, Jermaine Ifedi got absolutely manhandled in the preseason. And then the backup offensive lineman got manhandled as well. So if I'm a Chicago Bears fan, I'm very skeptical about whoever's at quarterback, their long-term durability in a 17-game regular season. They have to find a way to get things going, and they have to find a way to run the football this year. Take pressure off the quarterbacks from getting hit, but that's going to be an interesting matchup here Sunday Night Football. Big time.
Looking forward to it. And, we're going to be talking about that 17-game matchup and what it means as we continue to go through, because that is something new to this season as we get it started here today, just about an hour and a half away from NFL action. And as we get closer, one of the things that everybody wants to know is, what should I do about my fantasy team? I know I certainly have a lot of questions. We already have some here in the chat as well. So let's bring on our fantasy expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network, host of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, Vinny Iyer at Vinny Iyer on Twitter. Vinny, how are you, sir? Welcome in this morning.
Doing well. Nice shirt, Ross. Good job.
Thank you. I know we really we all got we stayed nice and branded today, bringing it out.
We still have that. Obviously, Vinny, great to see you. We had a question earlier on here in our chat from Adam Schneider about whether or not he should put Austin Eckler in his lineup here today against the Washington football team. Obviously, some storylines there. Eckler appeared on the injury report, the hamstring. He'll be full go here today, but he's going against Washington football team. What should Adam do in this situation here?
Well, I don't like the chances of Justin Herbert. New offensive line here. I know they're excited about their changes up front, but you're also facing Chase Young and this Washington pass rush. Also, you got William Jackson III back there. Sneaky pickup. I think he was a little bit underrated here as a legitimate corner, one of the best corners in the NFL that no one really talks about. So it's going to be tough, I think, to get downfield and throw the ball downfield on this team. I think also Washington will have some success moving the ball. They're just loaded with their skill players. So you're going to have a lot of checkdowns to Eckler. That's what we're looking for. Can he get involved in the passing game? Does he have a good chance to score a touchdown? I think those are all fair points here because it's definitely an offense in transition. We know it's a Joe Lombardi system here. So I expect him to be involved in the passing game quite a bit because I think that's where Justin Herbert's going to have to go. I don't think there's going to be a lot of downfield balls that you're going to see. So a lot of short to intermediate stuff to not only Eckler, but Keenan Allen in this game.
Makes sense. Vinny, we have a lot of players in and out in this game. Are there any big names that fantasy owners should be checking their rosters last minute to make sure that they don't have them in or make sure that they are included ahead of the Sunday action?
Yeah, I think we avoided all the major injuries this week. There's always guys going in not at 100% from training camp and preseason. We know the Ravens backfield. We're going to wait and see approach there.
Man,
but
yeah,
Tyson Williams is the guy you want to get in. I wouldn't quite look at Latavius Murray quite yet in your lineups. I mean, I just don't know what the role is going to be in the end. It's hard to just get up and running for your team in a short week and get ready for a game. So we'll see how that goes on Monday night. So you have a little bit of time to make that decision. But if you're comfortable with Tyson Williams, a guy that a lot of people may not have heard of until just a couple weeks ago, go ahead and do it because we know the game script is going to be great for the Ravens. They're against the Raiders on Monday night. So, yeah, we avoided the major stuff. I think your guys, if they're somewhat healthy in your lineup, go for it. Let's not question some guys here that you took ahead of other guys for a reason. Play them this week.
Well, week one's always hard to tell, right? Because we're only just basing things off of last year for the most part. Obviously, some matchups there. You know, Vinny, for you, when you're looking at all these games here, is there just this absolute one matchup where you must start this player against this team?
Well, I think the best matchup, is going to be the Vikings and their passing game. So if you can get Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen in a lot of DFS lineups, and, of course, sneaky stack him with Kirk Cousins, either or there this week. Thielen is, of course, a little bit better value that you can get in your lineup, but no Trey Waynes, the former Viking, will not be there. And the secondary is pretty bad there otherwise because they lost Jackson to Washington. So a lot of question marks there at the back end. I think the Bengals actually might be a little bit better, the pass rush with Trey Hendricks in there and some of the guys that I think are going to be more active at linebacker. But I see Jefferson and Thielen just having big games together in this one. It actually could turn out to be one of the higher scoring games of the week. So on the other side, you look at Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase. It's hard because I think Patrick Peterson is going to play a little bit better than a lot of people expect back in this scheme that he's familiar with. So something to watch there. But I think there's going to be some points put up by both teams here because I don't trust either defense in the Minnesota-Cincinnati game.
I am warm in my heart at the idea of both Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson going at one another on this football action. I couldn't be happier. When it comes down to a couple of other spots, we've been asking folks about this. Jameis Winston, Matthew Stafford, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, these odds about them being the top three newcomers to throw for the most yards in week one. Is it any specific quarterback name stand out for you that's on a new team coming in? It could be Carson Wentz who's getting started. Any of these guys stand out to you as must-start options?
I wouldn't say must-start, but Matthew Stafford, I think certainly can play in a 12-team league. What I'm worried about there is the Bears are not going to put up much offense in that game, so Matthew Stafford's volume is going to be limited. Where Jameis Winston, I know he's facing the toughest pass defense of all of them with Jair Alexander, but keep in mind the two outside linebacker pass rushers there, the Smith brothers, are a little bit hurt coming into this game. So there might be some time to throw. And again, high volume, I would expect. Aaron Rodgers is going to light up the Saints defense. We know it's not the same Saints defense. They're trying to duct tape it together in the secondary and try to make up for the loss of Hendrickson. Hopefully Marcus Davenport can step up. But you'd expect Aaron Rodgers to do his thing with Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, put up some points. So Jameis Winston, we know from 2019, he's going to have the interceptions, but he's going to have a lot of passing volume. And that's why they had to go this way, because they knew their defense wasn't as good. And, there's always the check down to Alvin Kamara, which is going to help him produce as well. And we know the Packers linebackers are a little bit questionable there. So, yeah, there's ways for Jameis Winston to produce. Again, I don't see a lot of volume from Matthew Stafford. Carson Wentz, not going to trust a guy that missed most of the preseason on his new team with limited weapons. So not going there. But, Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think, could have some success. I think more in the 252 range there. So I don't expect any massive games from any of those guys. But if you're looking for the highest volume, I think it's going to be Winston.
I like it here. And we got actually a comment in our chat here from Al's Toy Barn. He says, starting running backs, Derrick Henry, Robinson, Jacksonville, wide receivers, Terry McLaurin, DeAndre Hopkins. Who should I flex? Tyson Williams or Cortland Sutton, who's got a matchup against the New York Giants defense?
Well, I'm going with Tyson in this game because you look at Cortland Sutton, he's probably going to get James Bradbury, and that's not a good matchup. I mean, Jerry Jeudy is going to avoid that. I think Bradbury, just the size, his range here, length, I think that can give Sutton a lot of problems coming back from the knee injury. It's not the first thing you want to see getting back on the field, that matchup. And I think that's what people want to understand. The Giants' defense is going to cause some problems for a lot of fantasy football players on the other side. So keep that in mind. Williams is playing the Raiders. I mean, even if he gets 15 carries in that game to support Lamar Jackson and or Latavius Murray, he's going to be productive, where Sutton could see a bit of a tough time here and shut down, especially with Teddy Bridgewater struggling to stretch the field in that game.
Love it. Vinny, one last question for me for you. I stream defenses. Which defense out there has the best matchup against maybe a faltering offense?
Well, you could look at the Panthers for sure. We don't know what we're going to get from Zach Wilson. I actually am high on Wilson over the long term, but it's still his first start as a quarterback. You could look at the Texans-Jaguars game if you're going to extract something.
Sure.
Look at the Jaguars side, go there. But I think the best matchup, just for the nature of Jameis Winston having volume and maybe making some mistakes. We know there's always a good chance for a pick six with him. You definitely look at the Packers being a nice little streaming option for you this week. It's not a defense I like to trust week in and week out. They have some clunker games, but Winston might make some big plays and get yards, but there's going to be some turnovers there in that game. So Packers, if you're looking to stream, is not bad. And if you're looking for an either side matchup, maybe look at Washington. I know they're owned a lot of leagues, but Cody mentioned the Chargers, or maybe it was Sosa mentioned the Chargers in the previous segment, but yeah, I'm really high on what Brandon Staley can do with the Chargers. So that's going to be a team we're going to watch all season long to maybe be a regular fantasy football defense at one point.
Yeah, love it. Vinny, we appreciate you so much for coming through. We'll be sure to keep up with you every Monday through Friday over in the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and, of course, on Twitter at Vinny Iyer. We'll be seeing you here again next week, sir. Thanks so much for coming through. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Cody, good luck in your matchups this week.
Thank you. Will be needed.
Oh, man. I was a little anxious. I had Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin in one of my PPR leagues, man. I tell you what, I could have started either one and been okay. Now, I was skeptical because I thought, why don't I just start Brown in the flex? It would have worked out really well for me.
Yeah.
But, I did have Ezekiel Elliott, and the reason I went with Zeke in this matchup too against the Bucs on Thursday, despite the fact that I know that how good that defense is, I felt like the volume would have gotten me a little bit more. But we didn't see him do too much because he was involved as a sixth man on the offensive line. He's extra pass protection, so it goes to show there. So obviously a little bit of a concern there, but obviously all the great fantasy insight you need from Vinny Iyer, host of Locked On Fantasy Football, Monday through Friday, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. But man, Ross, we're just about an hour away from kickoff. Some other stuff coming in. Adam Schefter reporting that Quentin Nelson is expected to play. Emmanuel Sanders in Buffalo expected to play as well. Keelan Cole is out for the New York Jets. So outside of this too, and Zach Moss inactive for the Buffalo Bills. He's not injured. He's inactive. Surprise right there against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Big time, big time. So expect a big day maybe from Devin Singletary, who's going to get a lot of those carries out of that Buffalo backfield. And here we are again. So you have not only Stephon Diggs, but you've got Emmanuel Sanders ready to go week 1. Are we going to see the fireworks start from Josh Allen and this Buffalo Bills offense in the passing game early? Going to be a very, very fun one to watch for certain. Real quick, before we go game by game here, because we make a promise here every Sunday to make sure we talk about every team, every game. Before we get to that, I do want to talk about one of the pieces of news that came up as we were talking with Vinny, which was about the Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore Ravens in a really upsetting position going into the 2021 season, something you never love to see. You've got J.K. Dobbins, you've got Justin Hill, and then now, just a couple of days ago, you had season-ending injuries sustained by both running back Gus Edwards as well as star cornerback Marcus Peters. You've got Rashad Bateman dealing with injuries. How tough is it for a team to continuously have to recalibrate when you have injuries set in at such an unfortunate extent like what we've seen with Baltimore this offseason?
It's so brutal, Ross. Hey, look, that's just a little tip of the iceberg. They lost L.J. Fort to a torn ACL in the preseason. Derek Wolfe is battling a back injury. I mean, this is a team I've seen decimated. Marlon Humphrey, Jimmy Smith. Those guys are banged up too. They got banged up in the preseason with ankle and leg injuries. So it's like, man, I feel for the Baltimore Ravens here. Part of me has to wonder, Ross, is it the facility? Is it the field that they practice on? Is there something off with it? Is it turf? Is it grass? I mean, the NFL, they're conducting a lot of studies about how turf, obviously, when you have cleats and turf and explosive athletes, I mean, you could do a lot of fun things, but it increases your risk for some of those big injuries like the Achilles or the ACL. And I think that there's going to be a study about grass versus turf coming out in the next couple of years. The NFL may transition at some point to grass stadiums. I would like to see that personally. Why not?
Fan.
I mean,
Big fan.
I'm a huge fan of that, even though I played on turf, but I tore my ACL on turf too.
Right.
Non-contact injury. We see so much of that. But, for the Ravens too, I would be worried about them if they weren't coached by John Harbaugh. And I think John Harbaugh, regardless of the situation, is a phenomenal leader, phenomenal coach. He's going to help guide this roster, these teams, and whoever's going to fill in for those guys. Obviously, when you're filling in with guys like Le'Veon Bell, Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, it kind of helps lessen the blow a little bit, but it's still a big impact to lose two of those key backs right before the season even begins. So,
for sure.
I'm a little skeptical, though. I mean, you wanted to have a strong rushing game. That's why you had J.K. Dobbins, and that's why you had Gus Edwards. You wanted to take that pressure off of Lamar Jackson from having to do it himself. And with a 17-game regular season, I don't know if you want to put all that pressure on him specifically, because we saw in the playoffs, he got absolutely beat up. It's not sustainable for a guy like Lamar.
Yeah, and the 17-game season is something that I think needs to continue to be talked about, right? We're talking about adding an additional game, and yes, it's one game, I understand, and you took away a preseason game, you gave a week off in between the preseason and regular season. All that's fine and fair, but for some teams, you're now talking about a stretch of 13 straight games, 12 straight games that they'll have to play if they have an early bye week. Some of these teams might end up seeing some unfortunate returns based upon the addition of this extra game.
Absolutely. Well, and we talk about this too. Ross, I think you make a great point. You said, well, yes, it's an extra game, but so many people have that argument, but they fail to realize that in these games specifically, each offense gets usually maybe 67 to maybe 70 snaps on average in a game. And that's a lot. That's when we talk about volume for offense and defense, that is a ton of plays. That is a lot of physical contact, explosiveness, and opportunities there. So, it goes to the whole monitoring thing. Not to mention, Ross, the Thursday night football format is still brutal. Like, for example, here this week, the Washington football team, the New York Giants, they play here today, and then they got to play on Thursday. I don't agree with the NFL's decision, and I know that there was a little bit of pressure on the NFL, the NFLPA, to get a deal done before the offseason began, obviously for the salary cap implications for free agency, but this is something, in my opinion, they need to revisit in the future. Because, look, I know we all love watching football players play on Sunday. We like having 17 weeks of football and then the additional 3 to 4 weeks of the postseason, but the reality is player safety is super important. And I feel like we're maybe just now getting to a point where when we talk to fans, they care about players when they get injured. They care, maybe outside of the fantasy football standpoint, but they care like, man, this is a bummer. We look at all these injuries for the Ravens, and I think that the common consensus is, man, I feel so bad for them because this is just brutal. I feel bad for the players. I feel bad for the team. I feel bad for the fans. I feel bad for Kevin Oestreicher over there, host of Locked On Ravens.
Locked On Ravens, yeah.
But at some point, money's great and all, but at the same point, you have to factor in if the NFL really cares about player safety, they're going to look at doing something to modify it, at least make it a little bit more balanced.
Absolutely. Cody, we are going to take the last 10 minutes here of our show to take a look at our picks for this week. We're going to start off with your picks. Your picks here include the Thursday night game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers over the Dallas Cowboys. Congratulations. You nailed that one. Let's go game by game here, and then we'll specifically stop and point at some of the bigger games where you want to have some conversation. Los Angeles Chargers at the Washington football team. You've got the Chargers there. Seattle over Indianapolis. I want to push pause right here for just a moment and just say that I completely agree with you. The Indianapolis Colts are a team that I cannot trust right now with Carson Wentz under center. Am I unfair?
No, it goes back to the point too. Carson Wentz didn't get much time with a new team, a new offensive scheme, even though he knows it a little bit with Frank Reich's system. I see the familiarity with one another, but you have to have that translate. And then obviously Quentin Nelson too missed a majority of the offseason or the preseason with the same exact injury that Carson Wentz had, right. Ironically enough. I think that the defense for the Colts is going to be strong. I think it's going to be stout. It's going to pose a couple of problems here for Seattle, but in terms of offensive firepower, I think Seattle will have more than they will. Obviously, with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, the Colts defense will get some stops, but I think they're going to be on the field a lot, which does not bode well for them. That's why I took Seattle.
Absolutely. Now here, you didn't go with the Sam Darnold revenge game. Instead, Nope. New York gets revenge against its former quarterback, Zach Wilson, going to Carolina on Main Street and knocking off the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, look, I think Zach Wilson is going to have a hot start to his NFL career. I really liked what we saw from him in the preseason, even going against that Green Bay Packers defense with some of the first-team starters there. He was very, very efficient. I liked what I saw from him. Now, they've also been another team that's been battled by injuries. They've been tested. And I think that Zach Wilson here is going to lead the New York Jets on the road to Carolina. Look, Christian McCaffrey's returning, but I think that Sam Darnold, he's still got to get acclimated a little bit more with this offense. He looked a little rough in the preseason at some bits and pieces. I think it's going to take some time here for Darnold to get acclimated in Carolina. I think that Robert Saleh leads an inspiring week 1 debut for Zach Wilson, and they're going to win this game. But, like I said, keep an eye on Zach Wilson. I think he's going to light it up.
Yeah, big advantage of not having any tape on a rookie quarterback if that rookie quarterback can go out there and perform. You got Miami over New England in the AFC East or AFC. What am I? AFC East battle there. And then you've got Buffalo over Pittsburgh, which we talked about a bunch. So you took Tennessee over Arizona. We talked about those week 1 defenses. Are you concerned about Arizona's?
I am a little bit, and our good friends, Alex Clancy, Bo Brack over there, Locked On Cardinals, I think they'll share the same concerns about the secondary, right? Obviously, Malcolm Butler a couple of weeks ago just to say, hey, I'm retiring. So now they're in a rough position in that secondary, obviously losing Patrick Peterson in the offseason of the Minnesota Vikings. I just think that when you combine a strong rushing attack here with Derrick Henry, I think Arizona's defense is still going to be pretty solid. Obviously, with Budda Baker back there roaming a little bit, obviously with Zaven Collins at the linebacker position. I am just a little skeptical about, when you try to stack the box against Derrick Henry, well, now you have A.J. Brown, and you also have Julio Jones. And when I look at that secondary back there, it's just going to be a hard matchup, I think, for the Cardinals defensively to sustain that. So I think that you're going to see Tennessee go, obviously have a home win here against the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah. You've got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase taking it to former LSU Tiger or fellow LSU Tiger, Justin Jefferson. Denver over the Giants. Feeling confident about this Denver offense against the Giants defense?
I am. And the reason I say that too, Saquon Barkley, he's going to be on a little bit of a pitch count. Now, you do have to account for Devontae Booker, the backup tailback down there for the New York Giants. Obviously, Evan Ingram out for the Giants. That's a huge loss for them. Kenny Golladay will play, so that's going to be a nice factor to have in there. I think Denver's loaded up, though, on the secondary. It's going to be interesting to see this matchup. And look, there's a lot of pressure on Daniel Jones to start this season. Obviously, I think a lot of, his future in New York is dependent upon him having a good season this year. Tough way to start it against the Broncos defense that has Von Miller and Bradley Chubb on the opposite with the back-end secondary that they do have. It's going to be tough for Daniel Jones. That's why I have Denver winning this game.
Absolutely. You've got Cleveland falling to Kansas City, in which should be an absolute barn burner there. The opposite of that game being Jacksonville and Houston. You've got Houston winning that one. The Detroit Lions falling to the San Francisco 49ers. Then you've got the Battle of the Birds with the Falcons going up against the Eagles and winning that matchup. Not expecting too much of a fall off from this Falcons offense without Julio Jones, or is this just a nice enough matchup for them to open up the season?
I think it's a nice enough matchup for them to open up the season. You know, Ross, watching the preseason, I was very discouraged by watching Philadelphia. They just looked poor in each of their outings. Each game that they had, they just didn't look organized. And they got absolutely destroyed by the New England Patriots in one of those matches. But they didn't look well coached. They didn't look organized. And I have concerns that's going to leak over into the regular season. You've been resting Matt Ryan on the Falcons side. Obviously, Arthur Smith, they're the former Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator. They have a lot of stuff riding on this season. Yes, Julio is gone, but you have Calvin Ridley, you have Kyle Pitts, and you also have Hayden Hurst. So I think they're going to really try to involve with these three guys in the passing attack here. I think it's a good setup. I think Matt Ryan still has a lot of good football left in him.
Absolutely. You got Green Bay going up against the New Orleans Saints, who are going to be hosting this game. Remember, this is going to be in Jacksonville, Florida. It's not going to be in New Orleans at the Caesars Superdome. They have to wait a little bit longer for a season home opener there after the impact of Hurricane Ida. You got Green Bay winning that matchup. You're killing me, but I understand. You got the Rams toppling the Chicago Bears on Sunday Night Football. And then Monday night, despite the injuries, you've got Baltimore coming through against the adversity with a W here.
Well, you know, I made these picks before the injuries happened, so I can't change it. I gotta lock it in. If I take the L, I take the L. I do want to touch on Green Bay, New Orleans here. I think for me, we've talked about some of the storylines, right? Obviously, who's wide receiver one? I think it's Marquez Callaway. I think he's going to be wide receiver one for the New Orleans Saints. To my understanding, Traquan Smith's not playing in this game, correct?
That's correct.
So that's where, you know, you look at this secondary that the Green Bay Packers have. Obviously, Jair Alexander, they have pretty good talent there. That's where my concern just kind of ripples in a little bit regarding the New Orleans Saints in this game. But you know what? We could be surprised. I mean, like I said, Jameis could come out like he did in the preseason and light it up. I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be excited if that were the case. And obviously, you know, Tito in the chat says it's going to be a shootout. And he's talking about, too, he also, whatever part of Oregon you're in. Hopefully it's the Coos Bay area, my friend.
Gotta love that. All right, let's jump to my selections for this week, and we'll highlight just a couple of the games that we didn't touch. We have a couple of differences here. I took Arizona over Tennessee. Maybe I'm just being a little bit over Tennessee. Maybe I'm being a little bit NFC biased, but I am expecting, again, these defenses to struggle, and I'm very excited about what this Arizona offense could potentially turn into. I've got the Giants over the Denver Broncos. I get nervous about road favorites, Cody. That's really all that it is. It's not really anything about Denver, not really anything about the Giants in particular. I just get really nervous about road favorites, and this feels like a game that could go truly either way. So it's one of the reasons why I went with the Giants there as opposed to the Broncos. I have Jacksonville toppling Houston. I just feel like Tyrod Taylor's a great leader. Is he a great quarterback? I actually give the edge to Jacksonville when it comes to quarterback here, although coaching for both of these teams is going to be extremely suspect as far as I'm concerned.
No.
Oh, what you got? What you got?
I was just gonna say,
the coaching. You're worried about the coaching? Yeah.
I'd take David Coley over, you know, Urban Meyer right now. I think Urban Meyer's had an absolute terrible start in terms of headlines.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm just going with which quarterback has the heroics that they're able to pull out despite the coaching that they're up against. And for me, that's Trevor Lawrence. But we'll see. Maybe I'm just a little bit too high on the rookie. All rookies are all pros until they hit the field, right? When it comes down to San Francisco against Detroit, that was an easy selection for me. I agree with you there, San Francisco. If I remember correctly, Jared Goff has never beaten the San Francisco 49ers, although they were in the same division his entire career thus far. So that was an easy one for me. I will tell you this much, though. I also believe, though, that simply regardless of Jared Goff, this Detroit offense just doesn't have enough, not even at the quarterback position. I just mean all around. Losing Kenny Galladay, they've got DeAndre Swift, who will hopefully continue to be a weapon for them, but I don't think it's going to be enough to go up against a healthy San Francisco 49ers defense. I joked around with you a little bit earlier, but I also have Green Bay over New Orleans. I never pick New Orleans in the first week. They're usually not a team that wins their opening matchup. If they do win this matchup, it'll be the first time that they've won 3 straight years of week 1 matchups since I think it was 2008 through 2010. They don't win in the first week very often. And then the only other selection that I have that really differs from yours is that I did take Carolina over the Jets. I just think a little bit more continuity, barely, but a little bit more continuity for Carolina, just because you're bringing Sam Darnold in. You have new quarterbacks in both systems, but you're carrying over the coach and offensive coordinator relationship in Carolina from last year, and you have some familiarity between, Robbie Anderson and Sam Darnold, who have played together before. So it'd be really interesting to see exactly how this one works out. But other than that, I'm completely in lockstep with you, man. We'll update these picks all throughout the weekend and all throughout the week here, but it's going to be a fun day of football with some of these games we have lined up here for as Football Sunday. Week 1 is here, Cody. We did it.
We made it, my friend, and obviously some great insight from our local experts on the biggest stories. And look, the Locked On Podcast Network, we have whatever sport that you like, whether it's college, whether it's hockey, whether it's MLB, NBA, NFL. I mean, we even have rugby as well. So if you're into all these sports, we have a Locked On show for you. Obviously, our college network is growing. Make sure you find your favorite team, obviously, to keep you updated as to all the actions going on with maybe the University of Utah. I know for me, I listen to Locked On Mizzou, having graduated from the University of Missouri, Ross, and just a lot of great work here by our local experts on the biggest stories. The NFL channel, a lot of great insight. We had Crossover Thursday this past week, and every Thursday we have it where you get to hear the matchup from each of the local experts. It's fun. I enjoy it, and I'm so glad that we had a chance to break it down here on Locked On NFL Sunday.
Me too, buddy. We look forward to doing it again. We'll be back 11 a.m. Eastern time next Sunday to bring you all football and no fluff. For my friend Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, I am Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson NOLA. We will see you next week here on Locked On NFL Sunday, part of Locked On Podcast Network.